The mornings in our house always carried a familiar rhythm. Warm light slipping through the kitchen curtains, the faint sound of the kettle hissing, and his voice humming to some old tune he liked. I used to love those moments, the quiet before the day unfolded. I believed that this rhythm meant safety, stability, trust. After all, we had built this life together piece by piece. He was the kind of man everyone admired. Kind, reliable, with a calm presence that made people feel at ease. I'd often catch our friends watching us with a kind of fond envy, as if we were the definition of a perfect couple. And in many ways, I believed we were. Years of shared memories had stitched our lives tightly together. She came into our lives so casually, it almost felt natural. A close family friend who'd been around for years, always kind, always helpful. She would join us for dinners, lend a hand at family gatherings, and over time, became like part of the household. I never questioned it. Why would I? Trust was something I gave freely, without hesitation. Looking back now, there were signs, small, delicate signs I brushed aside as meaningless. A shared laugh between them that lingered just a little too long, quick glances when they thought no one was looking, a playful nudge here and there. I told myself I was imagining it. They were friends. We were all friends. There was one evening, though, that stayed with me. We were hosting a small dinner. She sat across the table, and when he told a story, her eyes locked onto him in a way that made something in my chest tighten. I remember gripping my glass a little harder than usual, then laughing it off as I always did. But inside, a small, uneasy whisper stirred. A whisper I silenced because I trusted him more than I trusted my own instincts. Life went on, as it always does. Work, errands, family plans. We moved through the days like a well-rehearsed play, every line and gesture familiar. But that whisper, it never completely disappeared. If only I had trusted that small voice inside me. If only I had paid attention instead of convincing myself everything was fine. Maybe, just maybe, things would have been different. It began with little changes, barely noticeable at first, like a shift in the air before a storm. He started spending more time on his phone, turning the screen slightly away when I walked by. His laughter sounded distant, as if part of him was somewhere else even when he was sitting right beside me. I told myself he was stressed. Work had been demanding lately. He was tired, that was all. But the explanations I gave myself were like fragile glass, easy to shatter with a single glance. He started coming home late, brushing it off with vague answers. Meetings ran over, he'd say, or I just needed some air. His cologne would linger stronger than usual, his hair a little too neat for someone who had supposedly spent hours at the office. I tried to ignore the creeping suspicion, but the unease grew roots inside me. Even friends began to notice. One afternoon, over coffee, a close friend leaned toward me and whispered, "They've been spending quite a lot of time together lately, haven't they?" Her words stung. I laughed them off, but my mind replayed every moment between them with new clarity. The whispers, the glances, the subtle shift in their body language, it all began to paint a picture I didn't want to see. One evening, I walked into the living room unexpectedly and found them sitting closer than usual, talking in low voices. The way they pulled apart when they saw me made my heart skip. They smiled as if nothing happened, but something in their eyes betrayed them. I told myself I was overreacting. But doubt was no longer a whisper. It was a steady, unshakable presence. At night, lying beside him, I'd stare at the ceiling, replaying every detail. My heart wanted to believe him, but my mind had already started connecting the dots. I wasn't ready to confront him, not yet. I needed to be sure. So I watched silently. I noticed the late replies when I texted him, the sudden secrecy, the emotional distance. My instincts were screaming, but my heart held on to the version of him I believed in. And then, one night, everything I feared unfolded right before my eyes. I never planned to follow him that night. It just happened. He'd said he was working late again, but something in his voice didn't sit right. It was too casual, too practiced. As he grabbed his keys and kissed me goodbye, my stomach twisted in a way I could no longer ignore. Minutes later, I found myself in the car, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding as I followed the trail of red taillights ahead. The streets were quiet, washed in the yellow glow of street lamps. My breath fogged up the window as I kept my distance, every turn amplifying the dread in my chest. He wasn't heading toward the office. I knew that route by heart. Instead, he drove toward the quieter part of town, where the cafes closed early and only a few dimly lit motels remained open. When he finally pulled into a parking lot, my heartbeat thundered in my ears. I parked farther away, my hands trembling as I watched him step out of the car. And then she appeared. Her silhouette under the streetlight was unmistakable. She walked straight to him, no hesitation, no secrecy between them. I watched as he opened his arms, and she melted into them like it was the most natural thing in the world. My world tilted. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. They talked for a moment, softly, too far for me to hear, but then it happened. He leaned in, and she didn't pull away. Their lips met in a kiss that shattered the fragile wall of denial I had built. Time froze. The noise of the world faded until there was only the sound of my own heartbeat, heavy and broken. I felt like I was standing outside my own life, watching it burn from a distance. Tears blurred my vision, but I couldn't look away. Every gesture between them, his hand on her back, the way she smiled, was a cruel reminder of how easily trust can be destroyed. I didn't confront them. I couldn't. I sat there in the shadows, clutching the steering wheel, letting the reality sink in. My instincts had been right all along. He had crossed the line. On the drive home, silence filled the car like a heavy fog. No music, no thoughts, just numbness. The world outside kept moving, but inside me, everything had stopped. That was the night everything I believed in collapsed. The line I thought he'd never cross, he did. The morning after felt unreal. The sunlight streaming through the curtains didn't warm the room, it only exposed the silence that had settled like dust. He walked in casually, as if nothing had happened, humming that same tune from our peaceful mornings. I watched him move around, every gesture unfamiliar now, every smile a stranger's. I didn't confront him immediately. I needed a moment to gather the pieces of myself that had shattered the night before. I made coffee, sat at the table, and waited. Eventually, he noticed the stillness. "What's wrong?" he asked, pretending not to see the storm in my eyes. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I saw everything I had missed. The late nights. The hidden smiles. The distance. "Where were you last night?" I asked quietly. He hesitated for just a second, but that second was enough. I already knew the truth. When I told him what I had seen, his face drained of color. He stumbled over excuses, work stress, confusion, weakness, but none of it mattered. The damage had been done. Words can't rebuild trust once it's been crushed under betrayal. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I just sat there, letting the weight of his actions settle between us like an unmovable wall. We talked for hours, though it didn't change the reality. He apologized, cried even, but his tears felt hollow. I had loved him fiercely, trusted him completely, and he had chosen someone else. If only for a moment, it was still a choice. The hardest part wasn't his betrayal. It was the realization that the version of him I held in my heart no longer existed. In the days that followed, I moved through the house like a ghost. Every corner reminded me of what we'd built, and every memory now carried the sharp edge of pain. I didn't make any rushed decisions. Whether I stayed or left wasn't something I wanted to decide in anger. But one thing was clear: things could never go back to how they were. I began to focus on myself, not us, not him, but me. I reached out to friends, started journaling, allowed myself to feel every emotion fully. Healing didn't happen overnight, but acknowledging the truth was the first step. Sometimes, it's not the act itself that destroys you. It's the moment you realize the person you loved was capable of it. Clapperboard, what would you have done if you were in her place? Share your thoughts below.